Tier 3 waters.
Tier 3 waters.
The question, I think, was what are we going to do to make sure that Tier 3 waters are protected? I think it is to make sure that the ENS is adequate and that all those, and that's built into the plans and specs, and the best way to help us with that, again, is that you identify that to us in your comments when you're looking at the plans and specs.
Because I'm looking at contaminants, not ENS.
Mhm.
Okay. And the soils question?
The question was, how we're going to use the USDA
Soil
soil
surveys.
survey.
I know that our technical people are looking at different information. I believe they are looking at that type of information, but I really need to confirm that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Number 3, come on up. Number 4, getting ready to go. I want to reiterate what you just heard. When the plans are out on your property, the DEQ is willing to accept additional input from you on your property, identifying stream crossing, hydraulic soil, the Tier 3 waters, both contaminants, erosion, sediment, and everything else. So thank you for that, Director. Number 3.
And if I could, there's a different deadline for the input for the erosion and sediment control that goes into October. I think it's October 13th. So that's on a different time path.
Hi, good evening. My name is Carolyn Riley, and I live in Franklin County. Our family is in the path of the pipeline as well. I'm not a soil scientist, however. I have 4 kids and got dragged into this mess over 3 years ago. We were contacted, and we relocated from Florida, where the water is not excellent. And we moved to the region. Really, we picked the land we have because of the 2 creeks that are there and because of the water. And I see all these water bottles, and I know y'all live in the city, and that's just how it is, but I think a lot of people out here understand the value of their well water. And so the threat of this pipeline crossing both of the creeks and the numerous water crossings, you've brought up karst so many times. And there's been clear reports about the risk that it is a no-build zone for a pipeline through the karst areas to the west of Franklin County. So it boggles my mind at how you're presenting in this matter-of-fact way as though it is a done deal. And it is not. And we, the people, have been trusting you and the DEQ to watch out for that water that's really sacred to us in the mountains in these rural communities. It's a resource that we cannot afford to lose. So my question is, how can you suspend, as Senator Edwards clearly requested, this process for the 401 review? It needs to be slowed down. I heard, only 20 or so were able to comment. The hearings have been packed. You've just learned of another new concern by one landowner. And it was hard enough for me to get here and bring my 3 kids along, and I've got to hightail home and make dinner. So there's other people like me and everyone else who is struggling to get their information out there. Now, what I want to ask as far as the erosion and sediment control plans, and I have not yet been able to look into the foot-by-foot analysis that you've mentioned, but you said that there's an internal review process, but yet you have allowed the public to comment. Thank you. But you also said that you've hired a consultant. Now, it's my understanding that this consultant also, or this consulting firm, works for Dominion. And I know there's a lot of accusations that have flown around of how cozy DEQ and Dominion can be, as well as the politicians, including Governor McAuliffe. So how can we know and trust, who is this consulting firm? Who are they? We're basically laying out our soil, our waterways in their hands. Who are they? This is an internal review, how do we get to comment on what their perspective is? So that's one question. And have they worked for Dominion? So 2 and 1. And I asked about slowing it down, suspending it. And then I do just want to say, I'm quoting, I'm fairly sure you said it exactly this way. You want to live within your legal authority as the DEQ. I'm here to say as a landowner, and I hope other landowners and other people are going to be sure to hold you to that, no matter what happens, because this is not a done deal, and you have the power. And I've witnessed the DEQ present to the State Water Control Board plans for spreading biosolids. And it tends to, from what I've observed, they tend to just take whatever the DEQ staff recommends. So really, it feels as though it's in DEQ's hands, not necessarily the citizen board, which it's just how it appeared to me at that time. All right, one other thing with the erosion and sediment control, I wonder if you'll be looking at historical concerns, because in Pennsylvania County, and I've given this documentation to the State Water Control Board at the May meeting, which you were at as well, Mr. Paler. There's a creek crossing with the Transco pipeline in Pennsylvania County where it's a 50-year-old pipe that's through there. 2 years ago, we had massive flooding in the fall, and the pipe was completely exposed. Tree branches, brush was hitting against this pipe in this creek 50-foot easement. So Transco was liable to fix it, and their fix was to lay this mesh of concrete across that whole 50-foot wide easement. And I've submitted documents, I've submitted photos of this, I've been to the location, you can go to that location, I could get you the landowner's name if you'd like to visit it. But that is not a way to mitigate erosion problems 50 years later. I mean, we could say, you mentioned these small cumulative effects, that it's really, really small, but what is compared to what? All right, I'm done. I could keep going, but I gotta stop because other people need to speak up.
Okay, I tried to take some notes, so I hope I got it all. I'll start with the consultant question. The consultant is Triple E Consulting. When we have a no conflict clause in the contract. The questions that we asked at the time when we were looking at proposals were, have you done any work for the pipeline? The answer was no. It turns out that I believe the number that I saw was that they've done about $44,000 worth of consulting for Dominion on some cell phone towers. They've done nothing related to the pipeline. And the contract that they're doing with us is $2.2 million. And our legal folks have concluded that that does not represent a conflict. We're getting good comments from them already, and I can tell you based on the comments that we've gotten that they certainly aren't deferring to what they see from Dominion. They're giving us critical comments all the way along. MVP?
Comments from them.
Oh, I'm sorry, MVP, right, thank you. Okay, let's see. As far as the State Water Control Board doing what we tell them, what we recommend, you should have been at the last meeting. They rejected one thing, and I guess one thing they did end up passing it 4-3, but there was a whole lot of pushback. We have a board that takes seriously what their job is, and I'm absolutely convinced that they're going to take this particular decision seriously. They've heard, I think it was 2 meetings ago, a number of folks from MVP came and made some presentations to the board during the public forum. I thought did a really, really nice job of addressing the board with good information, respectfully, and it was well received by the board members, and certainly teed up a lot of questions that they will have as this thing proceeds, if and when it comes to them. So I think I can say that, at least based on recent experience, you can be sure that individual board members are going to make up their own minds. I expect to be held to what the law requires. That's precisely why we do it, because whatever decision gets made, whether a 401 certificate is issued or whether it's not, we're going to be sued. And so you know.
Right.
So what I tell our staff is, we need to be right on the law, and we need to be right on the science, and that's what I expect of our staff. As far as suspending, as I said before, written comments are as useful or more useful than spoken comments. You don't also, with written comments, you're not constrained to 3 minutes. Sorry. You're not constrained to 3 minutes, and there's 50 days to do that. Now, that's longer than we usually have. That's out of understanding that this is a big deal. You know, we're going to review the comments and see where we are, but our conclusion right now is that in terms of what the rules call for in terms of timeliness and moving ahead and making decisions, that we're in the zone where we need to be. And as far as Transco is concerned, I don't know enough about it to comment, I'm afraid.
I'll make sure and submit on the erosion and sediment control about it as well.
Please do.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, I've already lost track of what number Miss Riley was.
I
Were
was
you
3.
Okay, number 4, you're up, and just so everyone keeps looking at their watches, we have exactly 1 hour left.
Thank you. Mr. Paler, Mr. Cunningham, I'm Jenny Chapman. I'm a resident of the Bent Mountain community, and I rely on a well for my water. I also have numerous springs and a bright, bold stream that runs through my property. So obviously, I, like many citizens on the mountain, are very concerned about groundwater and aquifer damage. I had the unfortunate experience of having this firsthand. Several years ago, I had a well, a very shallow well, but a wonderful well that produced more water than I could ever use in a day's time. And it happened that some construction happened down the road. Suddenly, I had no water. Nothing. The well driller came and said, well, it was an aquifer change. The aquifers can move, things can happen. What assurance do we have that you're going to protect our groundwater? What is the assurance that we have? And it seems to me that the process of all of this is just flowing faster than that bold stream on my property. We just seem to be rushing to judgment with this. I'm very concerned about that. We all are. And I'd like to know, worst case scenario, I don't want to even think about damage to another well. What happens to us? Thank you.
What assurance do you have, whether or not you take it as assurance is a different question, but we are absolutely focused on providing reasonable assurance that the construction plans will not affect groundwater flow. Now that certainly doesn't guarantee that that in some cases, there are not going to be some impacts. As I said earlier, where we think there is risk, we are doing dye studies so that we can make smarter decisions. There will be a clear requirement that if it's proposed, there will be a clear requirement for mitigation to any impacts that do occur, and what that mitigation would look like to make sure that if somebody has lost water, that it's restored is going to be case by case. But in no case do we believe that it's appropriate if the project goes forward for the developer not to be responsible for any impacts that do occur. We are using all the tools that we have available to us to be reasonably sure that there won't be impacts.
Could you give me some examples of what those tools would be? Because it seems to me that you aren't going to know what some of these problems will be until they happen. And then it's going to be too late. It seems to me that not every problem can be mitigated. So what are some of the tools in your toolbox?
Well, the tools are going to be dependent on if somebody loses water altogether. I mean, you drill a new well if that works.
Well, if you're drilling into contaminated water, it doesn't work that well.
The other part of reasonable assurance that we would expect is that we'd be reasonably assured that that there's not ongoing contamination of groundwater. You know, there are temporary impacts and there are permanent impacts, and we've got to look at both of those.
Well, thank you. I'd like to just offer you an assurance. I think you can be assured that we have exceptional water on Bent Mountain. That's a certainty, and we don't want to risk that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I have no doubt about that. I had some folks in Newport serve me up some of their water, and it tasted great.
We've got some outside you're
I bet you
welcome
do.
to. Okay, thank you.
As number 5 comes up, Director Paylor, by way of follow, what's in place to assure that the company would be financially responsible or that they would be willing and able to take the steps to provide mitigation in the future?
Well, in the draft certificate, there is a requirement. We are exploring whether or not we have the alternative of requiring surety bonds, so that some money is set aside to be sure of that. That, in fact, I think is a concern that we're going to look at and see if we have the authority. But in either case, the requirement to mitigate would be a part of the certificate if it's issued.
And is that a legal requirement that would be enforced by DEQ in a mitigation situation, or would that require court intervention?
Well, I don't know that I can answer that question. I have put the question to our attorneys to see what authority we have, and those, if we have it, I guess I would get some more logistics information out of that discussion.
Thanks. Okay, number 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Paylor, for being here. My name is Mary Beth Coffey. I'm a resident of Bent Mountain, and our house and basically our dwelling are about 250 feet from the potential drilling and trenching of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Each of my questions have actually been answered, but I want to know more about this mitigation. I mean, drilling a well, yes, that's one thing, and yeah, perhaps you're going to drill into more contaminated water. I just learned about water buffaloes. Oh my, oh my. I can't imagine. I go out, I get a drink of water, I water my garden, I take a shower in pure, clean water. Okay, a water buffalo, that's one of the mitigating, right? One of your mitigations, perhaps? Where would that water come from? I just want to know, I want to know all the mitigation, because we are in line to be, our water to be destroyed. What are more mitigations besides drilling a well and sending a water buffalo to the edge of my property? What are they?
It's a fair question. As I said, I'm not an engineer. I'm not the one to answer that.
But you should know to be able to tell. Well, this is a public forum. We need this information.
I agree with you, and I would ask you to put that question to us, and we will certainly have an answer as part of our response to public comment. But I don't want to mislead you into thinking that I'm the guy who can give you the complete list of all the...
Taylor, could the DEQ require MVP to submit plans for various mitigation approaches to different issues that could come up? I know that would be sort of theoretical and answering hypothetical questions, but could you put in place requirements for particular mitigation responses to particular events?
Well, we might be able to, and I'm certainly willing to explore the answer to that question. I think that there's enough site specificity to issues that I don't know that even MVP could foresee all the potential possibilities that would be there. I guess I'll reiterate again that it's our expectation based on the measures that we have in place that if the certificate is issued and if it goes forward, that problems of this would be isolated if they happen at all.
Thank you again, and I hope you use this as a learning experience and that you will bring people with you to help you answer some of these questions.
Thank you. Number 6.
I'm Bonnie Law. I'm a Franklin County landowner. I am currently right next door to the pipeline route. It's just inches over my property line. My house sits in the middle of my acreage, and my well is basically on the side that is going to be the closest proximity to the neighbor's construction. It was initially scheduled to maybe come across me, but now it's just inches over my property line. But I have a sneaking suspicion that it might swing back because we have a shared wetland area and multiple springs and a pond between us. So it's going to be a very, very tricky situation between he and I, obviously. So I'm deeply concerned about my well because all my drain lines and my septic system are on that proximity to the pipeline construction, and it's not that far with regard to footage. And I'm very concerned about the health department requirements related to that, so I'm anxious to read a lot more about that. But also, I would like to just express my sincere and total disbelief and disappointment that the people of Franklin County were not allowed to have an official public hearing or any form of meeting whatsoever. My state senator, Bill Stanley, wrote to you and requested that we have a hearing. I'm not aware of any response that he may or may not received on that. I would like to go on record to say that my delegate, Charles Poindexter, refused to ask for, to send a request for a hearing, so I'd like for that to be noted as well. My Franklin County Board of Supervisors members sent 2 separate letters asking for a hearing. It's my understanding that maybe they did or did not get a response. There may be someone here from the county tonight that might speak to that, but I'm not aware of any updates on that. But we have, out of basically 103 miles of the route, we have 36 to 37 miles of that route. We have the largest segment of the route of any county in the state. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of impacted parcels, tracts of land that will be impacted by this route and construction. And I think it is an absolute disgrace that we did not have a hearing there. And I think that you should allow the Franklin County citizens to have a hearing, and I think you need to schedule one after today. So thank you for allowing me to vent on that. I'd like to ask my questions one at a time, if that's okay, maybe get you an answer as we go along, if that's all right. One of my other concerns is also, it is my understanding that 2 of the State Water Control Board members' terms actually expired on June the 30th of 2017. Who will the new board members be, and when are they coming on? And my question is, why is Lou Ann Jessie Wallace, an expired term board member, out running a public hearing this week, multiple public hearings this week? Her term has expired. I know that it's up to the governor's office to review applications and appoint new members to the board, but I mean, honestly, do you have to have an expired board member out running a public hearing? Why couldn't some of the current board members that are going to remain on there, why are they not the ones out running the public hearing so they can work in a continual fashion with this. I mean, this lady, she may disappear tomorrow for all we know, and all the information that she's learned will basically just be lost, I think. And I think that's another shame that should be noted as well. And also, there's no one on the State Water Control Board that's from Southwest Virginia. I've looked at the backgrounds of all these people that are on this list, and I can't find anybody that lives in Southwest Virginia that's currently on this board. They're all from the Richmond area, I think Northern Virginia area, maybe maybe a Northern Neck area. So why is Southwest Virginia not represented on the State Water Control Board? I think, that's a problem.
Board members' terms don't expire, they serve until replaced. So it is true that Ms. Wallace is eligible to be replaced. I think I can.
Correct.
I think that I can assure you, especially now that she's been a hearing officer for this particular permit, I expect that she will continue to, that she will not be replaced. And I don't know what the long-term plans are for that. I don't work for the Secretary of Commonwealth's office, so I'm not privy to that. But terms don't expire; they continue until replaced. And I think it's fair to assume that the governor is aware of that. As far as and Lou Ann, in fact, is from Southwest Virginia. She lives in St. Paul.
Well, right, so I'm saying but her term, according to the DEQ website, her term has expired. You don't say that she continues to serve until she's replaced.
Okay, well,
your information says she's expired.
Perhaps we need to correct the website, because it is not uncommon for reappointments or appointments to not happen immediately by June 30th, and for purposes of making sure that the Water Board can still function with its 7 members, they continue to serve. And we've had others who have, in other administrations, who have served past their term before they were replaced or reappointed.
Okay.
I think that answers it.
There was a question about the Franklin County meeting, and Senator Salmon's office contacted us as well. Is there any update you can give us about a potential Franklin County meeting?
We, with the counties that requested, I think in most counties, I can't remember specifically if it was Franklin County, but the request was to come meet at the Board of Supervisors meeting. We declined to do that, but we offered to meet with any of their staff at a time that that would work mutually. I'm not aware that there's been any outreach from the staff to have that meeting so that we could brief the staff.
Will you commit tonight to having an official public hearing in Franklin County?
I can't commit to that tonight, no.
Okay. All right. My next question would be, there are some tracts of land in Franklin County that are not yet surveyed, have not had any kind of surveying whatsoever, that are on the direct path of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And there are also a new blanketed and wide-ranging number of survey letters that are now going out to Roanoke County for continual surveying. You were prepared to decide the permitting on this project after an August 27th comment deadline. How can you possibly accomplish this when the information necessary to your decision hasn't even been collected yet? Surveying is not done in Franklin County.
For E&S and stormwater, we are looking at the plans based on what the companies have provided us. And as part of that, we're looking for input in terms of where those plans are deficient from the public. In addition to that, we are also checking, with other sources in terms of the validity of the features on those plans.
But if no one has looked at them, Mr. Cunningham, if no one has been on those properties to take any kind of information, how is it possible for us to comment on something that's not even available to you?
I assume that anything that's on, you can look at the plans, and if there's streams aren't listed, if you think the contours are wrong, if there's karst areas that aren't identified, certainly you're on the property, you should be able, I assume you're able to identify those.
They won't be able to give us plans without having surveyed the property, so.
Okay, all right. My final question would be, the Mountain Valley Pipeline will probably cause an unprecedented for our state, disruption to our natural assets, our air, land, and water. Why do we not have a public comment period like we did this past week for the erosion and sediment control standards? Why is that not in the law, and can you change that where that would be possible? And doesn't your State Water Control Board have the discretion to establish a comment period under its responsibility under Virginia Code 62.1-44.36?
Under the law, it's very clear that both the erosion sediment control plans and the stormwater management plans do not require a public comment period.
Can you change that? Do you have the authority to change that?
That's something the General Assembly needs to, it's up to the General Assembly to make those types of decisions.
Are you prepared to make that recommendation to them tonight?
I'm not. That's not a thing that I'm prepared to make a recommendation on tonight.
Wouldn't you want to have a comment period for people like Ms. Karen Scott here tonight and people like me that just told you we have wetlands and ponds and creeks between our house and the construction?
In my view, we have in fact done that by publishing these for public input, which was a thing that we are not required by law to do. And we did that anyway. So you have the opportunity to review those plans. We've already had, in some other cases, some of those plans reviewed, gotten good comments back from landowners. So in my view, you have the opportunity to give us input. And the E&S law rule under the law is not under the purview of the State Water Control Board. It's a department responsibility.
All right, I just want you to realize that a lot of the people in the county where I live do not have access to internet service, and they have unreliable and sketchy internet service a lot of times at best. Okay, there's a lot of folks who live in my county that don't even have cell phone service where they live. This information is just not readily available to the public. Okay, you've got to understand, you're not dealing with Chesterfield County here. You're dealing with Franklin County. We're rural Americans, we're rural citizens, and we have 3 sources of water for over 56,000 people in Franklin County. We have the Roanoke River, the Blackwater River, and the Pig River. That's it. That's all we have. And they all feed in, except for Pig River, they both feed into Smith Mountain Lake. And that's a tremendous economic engine for our region and our county. And we have to do everything we could possibly do to protect all of these water sources from the top of Bent Mountain all the way to Smith Mountain Lake in our area. So I appreciate anything and everything that you can humanly possibly do to help us. Thank you.
Thanks. Number 7, come on up, Bert. As Bert comes up, I'll just point out we have about 40 minutes left. I'll remind everybody, if you have written comments you would like to submit as public comments, they'll be accepted today. You can also go through the other channels online and through the DEQ to submit written comments. Bert.
And I'd like to add, thank you, sir. Hello, Mr. Paler. Roberta Bondren from Bent Mountain. I represent Preserve Roanoke and Bent Mountain in the Protect Our Water Heritage Rights Group. I've been volunteering for the last 2 years with the Roanoke County Pipeline Advisory Committee. I appreciate you being here, sir. And wanted to add that for folks who need to submit comments electronically, we will be setting up days to do that if you look on the Power website. Sir, respectfully, I'd say you said you have nothing to do with eminent domain. I'd submit to you that in this case, given that there's a quorum of commissioners at this point, that you may be the only agency that stands in the way of my neighbors in eminent domain. With that, you have a heightened responsibility as I see it. At least to look at DEQ's mission statement, the mission statement of your Water Control Board. And as I view those, I don't see anything related to time limits in completing your mission with DEQ. And I'd refer to your board statutory requirement 62-144-36 that talks about the primacy of drinking water to be before everything else in your water quality standards. So we'd ask you to consider that. You talk about, there's a lot of confusion for the public in the differentiation between erosion and sedimentation control, which by the way, many of us didn't know until tonight. There is some sort of commentary being taken online, I take it, with regard to erosion and sedimentation. I'd appreciate if, after I make my ask here, that you would address that. You say that the cumulative effects will be temporary. There are several here, including Bob and Roberta Johnson, who would speak to that, and I'd ask you to have them address that, because there are scientists from the Johnsons to Rubin, to Louisa Gay, Carl Zipper, Ernst Castaning, the list goes on, Pam Dodds, who have told you these effects will not be temporary, they are unprecedented. And so the idea that you would refer out individual stream analysis, and it seems to me that that's where you're going, is to individual stream analysis in some of your last answers, is that why wouldn't you allow for individualized stream analysis? As many of your DEQ agents seem to be describing in their springtime statement in a letter to MVP and ACP with regard to individualized analysis. So we'd ask you to revisit that. And further, you talk about considering a bond. And a question that issue has come up again and again in the last couple of days. And we would ask you to have an answer to that if we're required to be held to an August 27 end of comment period. Wouldn't it be reasonable for you all to state whether MVP is going to be required to put up the cost of disaster with regard to our watersheds? So I want to go through the public process period with a direction towards requests for continuances and additional time periods for commenting. The FERC process, I think you appreciate, was a circus. Not enough hearings, things like the open houses were like college fairs. There were not enough and 3-minute closeted hearings for the public. You can the things that you need to hear, that you say you need to hear, is information with regard to drinking water. Dwayne Roadcap submitted a memo on December 9th. Tonight, you've mentioned your desire to have baseline water testing. We've only just seen one DEQ analyst request permission. And with the tenor of surveying across the Roanoke County community, I would suggest to you that that program will not be underway for some time at the rate those folks are going. Certainly capable and well-meaning gentlemen knocking on doors. But to my understanding, there hasn't been a lot of permission granted in Roanoke County yet. And to my understanding, there is not a legal authority for those folks to be there. So going back to, I'd just like to, explain a couple of instances of public process to you. And ask you to reflect that back for us in explaining why we might not have an extension of time for public comment or a suspension of this process until you can gather further information. On July 19th, there were 30 to 40 citizens and residents of this area who went a long way to visit with you folks in your board in Richmond at DEQ for a water control board meeting. We aren't allowed that much public input. I understand the regulations allow for that, for you to suspend any public comment. But our folks sat there from 9:30 until 4:35 that day. And your folks, your administration, took those names and saw those folks in a small room. And people, of course, there were some young upstarts, as they will, and you know, make no apologies for those folks. I think it was clear to you that there were citizens in the room who had signed up early, traveled there, and asked to speak, to educate your board, to educate you and your board on these matters. Lay people who you're asking to tell you things about this watershed. And tell us, you know, have you been to Bent Mountain? Have you been to Slusser's Chapel Cave? Have you been to Peters Mountain? I hope that in your career you have, because, you know, if so at 4 o'clock, we were told that attorney Melanie Davenport would roll out her E&S plan. That took until 4:35. And people, as I understand it, who waited to be heard. At 10 o'clock, it was quitting time. And that was the way it was in Radford. There were 6 people waiting to be heard who had prepared comments for your board. And at 10 o'clock, it was quitting time. And that was after MVP folks front-loaded and were allowed to sign up starting at 3 p.m., as I understand it. So please understand how your public feels that this is a farce. Why wouldn't they feel that this process is a farce, a dog and pony show for Governor McAuliffe's DEQ? So again, referring back to the drinking water memorandum, there are people, I could tell you at least 5 households where there are gravity-fed springs that your folks need to learn about. It takes time, as I understand it. I volunteer for Trout Unlimited, and I understand you need months of baseline water testing before you develop a standard. How can DEQ hold to its own standards of baseline water testing when you might be starting in August or September? So with those concerns in mind, sir, I'll ask you, why could you not revisit a suspension of this process? Why could you not at least consider Roanoke County's letter from Richard Kaywood and Ruth Allen, the Board of Supervisors, with regard to a 45-day extension? Montgomery County has asked for something beyond that. Those are my questions.
All 52 of them?
I have a habit of doing that.
I sort of lost track, and I remember you at the Water Control Board meeting, and thought that your comments at that meeting were very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, we are following a process that that is laid out in our rules. I have said that that we've got to look at the comments that we've got, and we will do that. So, as I said, I can't commit to anything more, but we need to evaluate and see if what we did was fair and adequate, and we will do that.
I'm going to add one more thing, sir. At that hearing, Excuse me.
Does
At that
the-
hearing I mentioned.
The Harrisonburg hearing or the Radford hearing?
No, the Richmond hearing, the Water Control Board hearing.
Oh, the Water Control
I
Board.
mentioned my neighbors, and I mentioned one and many of whom, and there's another in the audience here, at least one who I see today. You have before you generations of people who are not, and there's no reason for them to have learned and to pick up the internet and to be effectively online, that you should be hearing from them about their home places and the places that they earned by virtue of the fact that they went to foreign wars and they went to fight for due process. And that you're stripping them of it here is not acceptable. Please recall that.
Hey, Bert, what was the site you mentioned you were going to help with getting public comments? You said the power site?
Yes, sir. And so we would have public comment periods for Roanoke County and across the line in central locations
sorry.
before the 22nd.
Okay, so you're going to organize that?
Yes.
How do people get in touch with you to get that information?
Well, I send out pretty regular emails with my phone number on them and through the POWR website, POWHR.org, Protect Our Water Heritage Rights.org.
POWHR.org, so you have more information on there. Thanks.
Thank you.
While number 8's coming up, Director Taylor, will you tell folks how they can submit official comments still between now and the end, what the vehicles are to do that?
You can submit official comments if you have them in writing. You can give them to us this evening. You can mail them to us or email them to us, and I believe there are some handouts that were available that has all of the options in it. Are they out front?
Yeah, they're out on the table out front if anybody has questions about those. So, all right, go ahead.
Director Paler, I'm Richard Cable, the Assistant County Administrator of Roanoke County. I appreciate you being out in Roanoke County this evening and members of your staff. And also wanted to thank, Director of Operations Golden and Melanie Davenport they came out to the county about a year ago and took a bus tour with us. So we appreciate their interest in the project and willingness to go look at some of the sites that you've heard about tonight. A couple quick comments and then a question. I do want to emphasize that all the citizens in Roanoke County that are affected by the project are on wells and springs and quite a bit away from any potential public water sources, so that's always been a significant concern of ours. And then the reservoir that serves the bulk of Roanoke County its intake is very close to the crossing of the Roanoke River just over the line of Montgomery County. So water quality has always been an emphasis of ours. And to my knowledge, we're the only community along the route that actually has an MS4 permit with DEQ for water quality. And for us in our region, the number one pollutant is actually sediment. So our water quality program is basically sediment control, and that's what we focus on. And what we would like to see DEQ consider, and I think it's been raised a few times tonight, is the idea of having a performance bond on the project with specific water quality standards, again, which I think is inexorably linked to sediment control, and that would be the pollutant that you would be looking for. And set up that framework. That's certainly what we do as a county to enforce our program, when we're implementing DEQ's rules and DCR's rules for erosion and sediment control. We'd like to see that framework with the project. And I'll echo some of the earlier comments that slope stability and soil stability is a major challenge that we see on other projects in the county. So, I think that combination, regardless of what the project is and whether folks want it or not, those are very challenging working conditions. So I guess and then finally, I guess to reference where we've seen this done and we think successfully is the state of North Carolina in a hydro relicensing project done by Alcoa Power on the Yadkin River, required a very substantial performance bond and had specific water quality targets. And just ask if you're considering something like that for this project, and then ask any assistance or help Roanoke County might be able to provide in your consideration of that. Thank you.
Would certainly looking into that and considering that. And I made a note of your comment about the possibility of a bond if we have the authority, also having some water quality standards connected to it, and that's a good comment. So thank you.
All right, we have 20 minutes left as number 9 comes up. Let's try to get as many questions in here as we can, so as many people can be heard as possible. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Herb Beskar. I'm a resident of Roanoke City. Very concerned about our water quality. Most of our water comes from the pipeline route upstream from us. My question is, could you give us some examples of pipeline construction with stream erosion and sedimentation issues in the Appalachians, in the mountains, which have been successfully mitigated?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I will say that the previous speaker referred to James Golden and Melanie Davenport visiting out here at Bend Mountain. They have also spent some time in West Virginia where steep slopes are a part of what's going on as well, to learn what can work and what may not work. They would likely be better people to answer that question than I am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, number 10.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Lucky. I'm a landowner on Bend Mountain. I had several questions this evening, but they have all been asked. However, none of them have been answered. And so the question I'm going to leave with you tonight, and it may be a little controversial, but I have been really wanting to know this ever since this whole thing started. Why are we going through this, and why might you allow a private company to take our land, to destroy our water, and to possibly even blow up our properties for profit? There's no public good to come out of this. It's not for a hospital, it's not for a road, it's not even going to give people the ability to work here. So these people that were protesting last night, oh, it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring jobs. Wake up, people. It's not going to bring any of Southwest Virginia jobs. There's no good that is going to come out of this. And I, as an American citizen, have the right to own property, to live a safe life without fear of every Tom, Dick, and Harry coming down the road for their own profit and want to take my property. I'm sorry, I'm Italian, I'm very emotional. Thank you.
As I said before, I can't do anything about eminent domain. I completely understand that. And we have legal authorities that we have to live within, and those don't encompass the entirety of the project.
All right, as the next person comes on up, I point out, I think that very question that was asked is going to be litigated pretty hotly if this thing continues forward. Who's up next? Were you 11? 12? I'm 11. 11? Come on up, 11.
I'm 11. What is the law or regulation that prescribes the time period for this review process?
It is, there, I don't know the quotes, but in general, it's being driven by, throughout all of our
There is no law or regulation that drives this,
The
right?
Administrative Process Act has got requirements in it, and we just, we have, in general, we've got timeliness requirements throughout the code, and that's what we're reacting to.
But there is no specific law or regulation. There was mention of the consultant making comments on the sediment and erosion control plans. Are you posting the consultant's comments so that the public can see those?
No, we haven't been, but they are public information. If you want them, you can certainly have them.
So why don't you just post them? Because why don't you just post them?
We could post them. We really haven't talked about it, but in terms of the process, these are the initial completeness review comments that we have provided. There's nothing in there that can't be posted. We've got a lot of information on the website. That's something we certainly can consider and do.
Could you all maybe send Delegate Yost to my office links to or copies of those comments on the completeness review, and then we could share them if need be?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, you've spoken about the restoration in the stormwater context, of streams to like pre-existing condition. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you said, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware that when the proponent is excavating on the slopes, they will be diverting the water that they find away from the course that it normally flows, so that there will be no restoration. I just want to make sure you understand that. Do you know that?
If we're talking about the same thing for stream crossings, the restoration requires that the pre-existing contour be reestablished in the stream, if you're referring to stream crossings.
Well, no, I wasn't. I was referring to what Mr. Cunningham said about the sediment and erosion control requirements and the protections being so that there's no change from the existing condition. But if they're going to divert the streams off of the slopes in order to keep the soil from falling back down the hill, which is what they say they're going to do, then that's not restoring.
During the construction, they have to put in erosion and control measures that meet the regulatory requirements for the construction. Once the construction is completed, they're going to have to address the flow of water so that the pre-existing conditions, on the right-of-way, on the pipeline right-of-way, meet the post-construction conditions, so they're the same. So,
oh, you're talking about their bogus stormwater runoff calculations.
No,
Okay.
I just want to make it clear. I'm talking about the regulatory requirements under the Stormwater Management Program for meeting both water quality and water quantity. And our intention, the agency's intention, is to ensure that any plans that we look at meet the regulatory requirements of the stormwater management and erosion and sediment control programs.
Okay, I guess I just don't know how that's going to happen if they're actually going to change the drainage on the side of the mountain as they go. That's a question that I don't think can be answered. I heard that, this morning, or earlier today, a woman in Newport described that over 2,000 feet of the pipeline would be going through her farm, and that it would be impacting the water supply for her home and her livestock. And she wanted to know what she was supposed to do about that, or maybe it was in the context of how do you mitigate that. And Mr. Paler's response was that she needed to find an alternative water supply. And it seems to me that she's not the only one in that situation. There are going to be a lot of landowners in that situation. And I don't understand how you can make a 401 water quality certification without first knowing where that's going to happen and how many people that is going to happen to. You're putting the cart before the horse.
Well, I don't, if that's what I said, that isn't exactly what I intended or what I understood at the time. She was asking, what am I going to do if, if I lose my water supply. And that gets to a question that we've talked about already tonight. First of all, our expectation of any requirements that we would put on the placement of that pipeline through that property, in order for that to happen, we should be reasonably assured that there is not going to be an impact. But she said, her question was, what if there is? And the what if there is part is, we will have a requirement of the project that they've got to solve that.
Is that already in the water quality certification?
I believe so, yes.
That they have to replace water supply systems?
There's a mitigation requirement that is a part of the certificate. And it's also reflected, I believe, and I'm going to emphasize, I believe, it's reflected in some of the documents that they, or at least one of the documents that they filed in a request for information from us, which becomes a part of the certificate.
The top of Poor Mountain, Bent Mountain, sits on granite. It's where my home is. My home was damaged by the earthquake in Louisa County. They're going to be blasting off the top of Poor Mountain. They're going to be doing a lot of blasting up there. You cannot have any reasonable assurance that our water will not. That community up there, let me show you what the construction zone for a 42-inch pipeline looks like. That's what it looks like, okay? On the top of Bent Mountain, the streams that they've admitted that they're going to cross 32 times. Now, you heard Ms. Scott say that that's inaccurate on her parcel, that there's 3 more, or something like that. It was inaccurate. They're going to cross streams 32 times. They're going to do this 32 times, and they're going to do this 44 times on wetlands. And that pipe is a giant French drain going across the top of the head of the Blue Ridge Plateau. There is going to be a dead community up there. Abandoned property. And you sit there and say you can have a reasonable assurance that water quality standards will be met with this. What's 32 and 44? 76 times? 76 times in 6 miles? This? No freaking way. Are you aware that the managing partner of the limited liability company for MVP was charged with environmental crimes in Pennsylvania? And they pleaded guilty to intentionally polluting water. And if you're not, you need to be, and I'll put it in the record, don't worry. But the question is, why would you even consider granting any kind of approval without a gigantic performance bond? Want to answer that?
We are working with the laws and the science that we have, and I have lots of technical advisors, and
But I'm talking about their criminal record. I'm talking about who these people are. They sneak onto people's property that they have no authority to be on before dawn. They manipulate the court system. They've pleaded guilty to environmental crimes. They're crooks. What is the procedure for assessing streams that are in this pipeline route that are already impaired, subject to TMDLs? And do you know how many streams aren't impaired that end up going to be impaired? You have to understand, MVP has already said that the few streams that they've done sedimentation analysis, that the baseline will never be the same. They are going to cause permanent harm, and they've admitted that. As a matter of fact, the question about whether there's any experience of somebody building a pipeline like this through the mountains like this and doing it without causing harm, the answer is no. And the mitigations that they have proposed to use in Pam Dodd's report that Rick Shingles has provided to you, she's got pictures of that. We'll make sure you get plenty of pictures of that. The silt fences and the socks completely failed in West Virginia on the Rover pipeline and on much less steep slopes. You can't mitigate this stuff. So how are you factoring in the impaired waters? Where's that information in this 401 process? Is that up on the website? Have you accounted for the impaired waters, the waters that aren't impaired and the ones that will be impaired and then need TMDLs?
We would not expect to have impaired waters created under the rules. Reasonable assurance of protecting water quality means to us that the water quality will be sustained, and there will certainly be temporary impacts, but if we issue the certificate, we certainly wouldn't issue the certificate with an expectation that we're going to create more impaired waters.
Well, they've already said they will do that. So just make sure you understand that. It's in the sedimentation analysis that was done for the Forest Service. It was even a limited section of this project. And it's in the endangered species waters. This is, reasonable assurance that this is going to protect.
We have 5 minutes left if number 12 wants to come on up. Again, we got 5 minutes, so thank you, sir.
My name is Matthew Pickett. I'm a resident of Blacksburg, Virginia. The pipelines that go very close to my residence for 25 years, which is not very fun. My first question is, have you seen in person the picture that Tammy just put up? Have you seen that? Like, have you driven up to one of those? Like the big swath of land that's just kind of clear cut. Have you been there? You've seen it? I've flown over it. I've done about 7.5 hours on a helicopter, and I've seen 40, 50, 60 miles of that in West Union, West Virginia, and below. And it's really devastating, especially when you see freshwater lakes on top of this mountaintop removal with barbed wire on it. Since when did water become a resource? But it is. That's kind of what we're, I think, all collectively saying is there are companies that are barbed wiring their water so that the public can't get it. This seems like it's going to eventually lead to the same thing. Second is I'm a professional in the feature film industry. I'm familiar with LLCs showing up, taking a bunch of Los Angeles people, coming in there, messing everything up, and then leaving. That's typical. I'm in the Appalachian Mountains, so I kind of have to clean it up. We talk a lot about construction. We talk a lot about going forward. We're talking generalities in the environmental sector. It seems like you can't answer all those things, sure. What about building? What if we actually have a plan to build this thing? Because essentially you guys thinking you're going to do it. So who is going to build this? Because when I do feature films, generally it takes years of experience to know how to do just simple things. We hire from Richmond as our lowest, or our localist hire. We had 5% on a film that was sold to Sony for $5 million. 5% of our crew, about 5 people. It's not a lot, which means that no one in Southwest Virginia is represented. Seems like we're just have a lot of people show up, use our resources, and leave. Is there gonna be anybody working on this? Are we gonna train employees for 3 months, 4 months, however long it's gonna take? Is there a contingency plan to even put Southwest Virginia on the economic part?
A couple of different issues there. I guess the best thing I can say is we will have compliance inspectors out there the entire time. If they're screwing up, we have the ability to deal with.
My man, hold
I'm
on.
sorry?
I said, my man, hold on. I was a co-producer on a feature film that I was trying to keep from people to mess up Grundy, Virginia and Bristol, Virginia. That was basically my job. I was hired by Los Angeles producers that said, hey, we want to make sure we take care of the land. And out of 100 people, I'm less than 1% of the crew, and Virginia was less than 5. We had complaints everywhere about stuff that was done wrong. I understand that by the law, you'll have compliance out there. We did too. We messed up. But we were creating a product of art to be sold, not digging in the ground. That is a concern. That's not a question. Thank you.
All right, so 13, you got about 30 seconds. I know.
My name is Phil Pickett. I live in Blacksburg, Virginia on the Mount Tabor sinkhole plain. And when I found out that this project would be running through our area, I was wondering about how they would mitigate if we and everyone in our area, hundreds of families and farms and everything, lost our water supply. So I went to one of the meetings at the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors meeting where they had an attorney and a representative of Mountain Valley Pipeline. And we asked, so in case you do mess up and we do have problems with our water supply and we have to have municipal water supply pumped out to us or whatever, are you guys going to put up a bond? So the attorney said, well, as an LLC, we don't have to. And then the representative kind of flippantly said, well, there's always bottled water. Okay. So I got to looking, and this is true. Now, I come from Arkansas, and I went to school in Louisiana, and I have relatives in Texas and Oklahoma. Up until 10 years ago, there was more natural gas pipelines in those 4 states than the rest of the United States. So I'm pretty familiar with living over natural gas pipelines and everything. And come to find out, 20 years down the line, if the pipeline is no longer being used, they don't have to dig it up. They don't have to do anything. It's the landowner's responsibility. And in this particular case, if you're in karst terrain and these pipes are not being used, they're going to rust faster than they would if they were being used. And so we've talked, 4, 5, 7, and 11, I think, speakers talked about having a bond. And I would like for your group, DEQ, and our delegates to basically hold these people's feet to the fire. They're going to make just the pipeline company alone 14% profit. It's guaranteed by the federal government. That is almost $500 million. If they can't put up some money so that all these people, and I'm not just talking about the fact that Salem and Roanoke may have their water supply trashed and we may have to find a new water supply, maybe pumping in from Clater Lake or whatever. But how about all the people that live out in the countryside that need municipal water to take care of all their other stuff? So I would like for, once again, delegates, DEQ, to put some ironclad stipulations in this, if indeed you are going to approve it, which I wish you wouldn't, and if we would just basically establish a precedent nationwide so that these companies cannot run roughshod over the people of the country and the people of Virginia. Thank you very much.
So, thank you to everybody who commented. Let me say a couple of words. Thank you to the 100 or so of you here. We had probably a couple hundred in Newport this morning. These were very respectful, productive meetings. We very much appreciate Director Paylor and his folks from Richmond coming down here. And I believe you all have given them an impression of how significant this issue is to everybody here. I want to encourage everybody out here who this is important to continue to engage in the process, especially if you have comments that need to be submitted formally. One thing they have shown total interest in today, they being the DEQ, is they want you all to fill in the gaps in the information that they are getting. It's our job to clarify and to correct and to fill in when the information they get is wrong. Thank you to Delegate Yost's office who helped coordinate these 2 meetings today. His staff and my staff and Delegate Yost himself and I myself are certainly happy to help communicate comments on your behalf to help facilitate the process, so thank you. Also want to thank Senator Edwards, who attended today. You had 2 members of the Roanoke County Board of Supervisors here today. You had someone from the Roanoke County Attorney's Office here today, someone from the County Administrator's Office today. That should show everybody how important all of your local government, as well as your federal government. We had people from the Congressman's office here today. So thank you all for that. Again, thank you for being here. The live stream will be uploaded onto our Facebook page, Delegate Greg Habib Facebook page, if you want to capture the video, and we'll also make the transcript available. Director Paler, again, thank you to you and your staff for being here and for giving us an entire day. Thank you, everybody.